everybody. Welcome here at the Accenture Lounge. I'm Sander van het Noordende, and I'm going to be your host and moderator today. This is our 5th Accenture LGBT panel. And of course, 5 is a special number. But it's also, I would say, a special year for us here, because it's also the year that we are launching a new partnership with the WEF, initiated by 7 companies: Deutsche Bank, E&Y, Microsoft, MasterCard, Omnicom, and Salesforce. So it's really a milestone. For me, personally, this all started 5-6 years ago. Dan Bross, who I will introduce to you later, was on the case, who was then at Microsoft, was on the case a bit before me. But 5-6 years ago, I saw an interview with Klaus Schwab on the television during the WEF, and he was asked a question by Richard Quest. Mr. Schwab, why is there nothing about LGBT on the WEF agenda? It's a very important subject. It's about inclusion. There's discrimination. Why is there nothing on the agenda? And he spoke the following words, and I promise this is the last time that I will tell the story, also to Mr. Schwab, because we've come such a long way. It won't do justice to him. He said, well, Richard, there are many subjects on the agenda of the WEF, and unfortunately we cannot have all the subjects on the agenda of the WEF. So not exactly the answer you would be looking for. So then we met with a few folks later that week, and we said we have to change the game a little bit here. And that's where Microsoft started organizing their breakfasts. Accenture, we did our panels. EY has chipped in. GLAD is now also present, so there's a lot more activity this time around now, ultimately culminating, I would say, in a new beginning, and that's the partnership we're launching here. We launched yesterday, but I would say we're celebrating here today. Let me introduce to you our panelists. Michelle Bachelet, she's the former president of Chile and now the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. My friend and partner in crime, I would say, Beth Brook, the vice chair at EY, Tony Profit, the chief equality officer at Salesforce, and Barry Rafferty, the CEO of Ketchum, which is part of Omnicom. Michelle, we're going to start with you. This partnership is all about operationalizing the UN standards of conduct for business for tackling LGBTI discrimination. Can you remind us why we have those standards and what they are?
I will be like you, Sander, because I'm going to tell the story today that I told yesterday, and probably many of you already know it. But in 2016, during one of the Davos sessions, my predecessor, Prince Said, he realized that business did not consider that they have a responsibility with the LGBTI community inside the companies, but also they thought that LGBTI right was not a part of human rights agenda, if I may say. So there was a decision made, and every time the UN analyzes, there are a group of people who don't have rights, tries to work with the private sector when it's linked to the private sector, of course, also with the governments and civil society to improve that condition. I said this because in 2010, I guess, or 2009, was also developed the women's rights policy. So also in business, women could have more alternatives. So they decided to work on the standards. And what are the standards for? It's first of all to know and protect human rights of the LGBTI community, to promote all kinds of human rights, to protect LGBTI community, but also to go public. And what we are asking on the standards, I mean asking, of course, encouraging the companies, is that they put in place anti-discrimination policies, that they can also have grievance mechanism, and they can also have due diligence. We're also calling on sensitizing managers and ensuring that they will have equal benefits, the people from the LGBTI community inside the companies. And we're also asking them to go public, to be visible, in the places where they are, they can also support LGBTI communities, NGOs, etc., and to work and to build partnership with the civil society, and of course try to influence governments or parliaments to put in place adequate bills and laws, or to change inadequate and discriminatory bills and laws for the better, to ensure LGBTI's community rights.
Thank you. Beth, how did this partnership happen? How did it come about? And why are you excited? I assume you're excited.
I'm very excited with our colleagues in crime. You know, this is such a monumental week, I think. I think you described the standards so well, and you know, how this came to be really was, as you described, Sander, and with Dan, you know, a handful of companies working behind the scenes here for, you know, 6+ years, very quietly trying to make progress. I remember the private meeting we had with Vice President Biden, who sat in a small private room a few years ago and looked us in the eye, and he said, "You multinationals, you companies can do what we, the government, cannot do. And I implore you to do it around the world on LGBTI matters." And we took that to heart. We believed it ourselves, but to hear that was you know, instrumental. So, you know, working just with the World Economic Forum over those years, you know, we came to, you know, agreement this year to form this project in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, with the 7 companies as founding companies, but as you said, High Commissioner, in partnership. You know, I think partnership is a 21st century skill. And I think we're seeing it around the world with civil society organizations and the companies really starting to work together. You know, there was a period of time, I think, when activists didn't like big corporations, and big corporations were skeptical about the professionalism of the activists. And that has gone by the wayside. I mean, there's a real sense of partnership now, working together. So what are we trying to do? We are not trying to recreate anything. Our sole goal is to help companies activate the UN standards. That's what we're going to try to do. So 3 things. One is to build out a due diligence framework. So if you could imagine, you know, kind of due diligence, and you take the standards. So if you're a company, you kind of go in and self-diagnose, you know, how can I activate these standards? What else could I do? So kind of a due diligence framework. Best practices around talent. What, you know, sharing and learning together as organizations. So you got the playbook, you've got, you know, organizations are going to learn together. And then the last thing is this collective action, individual and collective action in the public space, which is no one of us, as we all know, no one of us can do this. It's going to take all of us together. There is strength in numbers. There's confidence in numbers. One thing we consistently hear around the world, and as we've made more progress, you know, we are subject to pinkwashing, which is you do great in your headquarters, but you're not getting it across the world. And so this will be helpful in our effort to go from the headquarters to the outpost to really try to push around the world together collectively. So I am, you know, excited that it's, you know, it's the founding companies, but it's the founding company. We want, you know, as you said on the press conference yesterday, we want, you know, our goal by end of 2020 is to have another 100 companies involved in this. Obviously, civil society organizations, foundations. So we hope to grow this greatly. We'd hope to have 200 companies signed on to the UN standards, and to make great progress. So excited to be a part of it, and I think it is a momentous week.
Yeah, thank you very much, Beth. And you're both saying it in different ways, but there's so much that business can do, and that we actually should feel obliged to do, so to speak.
Well, in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, which is an enormous platform to make progress.
Tony, when you at Salesforce heard about the partnership, what did you think?
Oh, we were tremendously excited. You know, this is a great opportunity for businesses to make a difference in the world. I think from Michelle and Beth, you know, the themes that you heard early on, how businesses are uniquely positioned to make a difference in these multi-stakeholder dialogues. You used the word obliged, and I would argue that it's not just an opportunity, that's an obligation. And for businesses that have been vested with a platform by their stakeholders, by their shareholders, by their employees, by their customers, I would argue that you have a responsibility and an obligation to use that platform for the betterment of society. And one of the foundations of a great society is human rights. And the notion of be able to express yourself and your sexual orientation and your gender identity at work and broadly in the community is a foundational human right.
Right. I couldn't have said it better. I mean, Barry, you have also been an advocate and a joiner from the start, or an initiator.
Yes, and I agree with you. It is a human right. And, we looked at our own population and really have worked hard on inclusion, because we know if our people can bring their whole selves to work, they're going to be more productive and they're going to do more. But from Omnicom perspective, we also think that being marketers, that we have a great opportunity to showcase the whole society, and whether that's online, on screen, in media, their visual reputation and the words that we choose can truly make a difference. And so we look at it both as a pledge internally to do better for our own employees, but also to make sure that we're trying to share and reflect and work across the world. And as you say, it's different everywhere. I mean, our Open Pride affinity group, we see that there's a very local piece of that, right? But there's also that part of belonging, and we have a global community, and there's people in that community that say, if their parents knew they were part of that community, that, they would be disowned. So I think bringing your whole self to work and being able to find a safe place to be all that you are is really important.
Right. We're going to do a little thought experiment. Yesterday, the title of the press conference was, "Are we there yet?" What in your mind, I mean, maybe if you just sort of close your eyes and dream, what is there in your mind? Where do you think we should be heading? And then I'm going to ask how the partnership is going to work, help establish that. So, Michelle, maybe.
Well, in an ideal world, 100% of companies will be, with due diligence policies, will follow the standards, but not only will sign the standard, but will implement it. And not only at headquarters, but also at all the levels. That would be my ideal.
Yeah, I would say we're not there yet.
Of course.
In any way, shape, or form, and even as a progressive company, we brought in an outside advisory board and with employees, and there were things, even in the past 6 months, as we looked at this, that we started to change. So we have within Ketchum, Belong at Ketchum, and we had maternity leave. And a lot of our people in back to us and said, well, that's doesn't represent everyone, right? And so now we have family bonding time that we launched this year, right? And it covers fostering, adopting, yes, traditional birth, but everyone has the same amount of time, both sides of couples. We had lactation consulting as something that you could, get as part of maternity leave. Now you can take a course on sleeping and everything. So much of it, even within, when we looked at, things in our own backyard, we said there's more that we can do to make sure that we're being inclusive. And so I think that, looking inside your companies is so important, and thinking about the language and the visuals and everything that you use can really make a difference in making, all parts of the LGBTI group feel connected.
Yeah. We are clearly not there. And unfortunately, when you look at the news cycle, just look at the last 48 hours of the news cycle. Not only we're not there, we're falling back in some places. And with the polarity in the world and the divisiveness that's happening in many societies around the world, you're seeing places where we're now falling back. Rights that had been previously won or assumed are being called into question. And it's a moment of where leadership, we're being called on to lead in this moment of tension and this pivotal moment in human history, I would argue. The point about what is our aspiration is clearly that in workplaces and in any institution, in any society, that people can be their authentic self, regardless of their sexual orientation and their gender identity. And they can come into a workplace without fear of judgment or discrimination or bias or harassment. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, an NGO, academia. I mean, that's ultimately where societies should be heading.
Right.
I believe it's...
Yeah, we all agree. Why is that important? Why is that important for business and organizations? Just,
Okay, I'll give...
just to play devil's advocate for
okay, I'll give you an example. We at Salesforce have an employee resource group called Outforce, and it's for our LGBTQ folks to have a community and also for their allies. But we didn't have a chapter a year ago in India. So we went to launch Outforce in India, and we went to march in Pride in Hyderabad. And so we're there in Hyderabad celebrating Pride, and we're feeling good about celebrating and standing in partnership with the LGBTQ folks in India. The only problem was nobody in the office was out. They did not feel comfortable expressing their sexual orientation and gender identity. So you imagine going through your day, trying not to out yourself and saying, well, last week I told you this about my interests, and I told you this about my family, and I told you that, and you're triangulating, and you're using 5, 10, 15, 50% of your mental power just trying to remember what you told someone so you don't out yourself, right? How is that person really going to do their best work, right? So the business value is, by the way, the day after that Pride, one person came out.
Fantastic.
One brave soul came out. And in that moment, that person was free. And that fraction of that person's mind that they were using to triangulate about what they told what to whom when was free to devote to doing their personal interest and the best work of their life. That's the business value. We're all surrounded by people playing these tapes. It might be about your race. It might be about something else. And to be freed from that and just to be able to express your authentic identity at work, that is the business power of allowing people to do the very best work of their life and not processing these tapes about their identity.
Let me put some numbers to that, because this is where I think we have made progress, I think, is on the business case. I really do. I mean, but to put numbers to the situation you describe, as I understand it now, 20% of millennials identify as LGBTI. 29% of college graduates identify as non-binary, neither male nor female. So 20%, 29%. Then they come out, then they graduate from college and join our workforce. 62% go back in the closet. When they go back in the closet, they're 30% less productive. What's wrong with that picture? I mean, that's just ridiculous if you're business. So, I mean, that's just the numbers of the India person going, in the closet. They're 30% less productive, which is just stupid. So I think we've made, to your leadership point, where we are, I think we have made great progress on the business case. I think where we are, and it's a moment here in Davos, and it's being debated in Davos, a lot of talk about about profit or purpose. Well, it's not one or the other. It is, if you're a business today, you are being held to a different standard, kind of Barry, to what you say. You're being held to a higher standard to describe your purpose and then to be public, in the public sphere, about that purpose. Well, to me, that means our issues have become part of that human rights piece is part of the purpose, and it's become part of the business case. So it's no longer, is it a human rights issue or is it a business case issue? It is one and the same now. And you're being held accountable as a company for not stepping up and speaking out anywhere in the world.
May I add something? Because I completely agree with what you have said, and I think it's fantastic when people can be free, I can feel safe also, as you have mentioned. But what I've seen in some numbers is even companies who have signed and for the standards and that can have anti-discrimination policies, still when you see at the senior leaders, there's not till there yet. I mean, in the recruitment process, they're also biased. So we need to do much more. Not only that people can feel that their sexual orientation or gender identity is respected, but also to provide them the opportunities to show their talent and be able to have, to be in the positions they deserve.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that, about senior leaders. Imagine you are a senior executive in a multinational company. You haven't had much exposure to LGBTI or LGBTI issues, matters, maybe even LGBTI people, although it's sort of hard to believe these days. But
that's where you live.
And you're being asked to say, would you be willing to step up to be the sponsor, the executive sponsor of the LGBTI networks or the agenda in the company? Maybe each of you has one tip. What would you advise that senior leader to do? Maybe one or two things.
Create your own safe space. Just have a round table with folks with identities different than your own, and just take the time to listen. That's a very low risk step. You're in a listening posture. You're building your empathy. You start to build your vocabulary, your awareness, your connection with folks that have identities different than your own. So just asking people to share their personal stories is something super powerful. In this room, there's 100 people, and listening, there's thousands of people. And I guarantee you, among these 100 people, there's 100 unique stories. You can't make presumptions about their stories. Just ask, listen, then over time, begin to show up for those folks. Maybe in silence initially, but as you build your confidence and vocabulary, you can show up and use your voice and your platform as an advocate, a mentor, a champion, a sponsor for these folks, and that progression of just asking, listening, showing up, and speaking up.
And I think consistent to that, I think we need to be kind of forthright about saying, don't be afraid. A lot of people are absolutely afraid to be an ally. They're afraid that people will think they're from the LGBTI community, or they're afraid of just saying the wrong thing because they're not. Exactly. I mean, I remember when I came out at EY, the head of our LGBT network did not let me talk for a year. Didn't. Didn't let me do an interview, didn't let me do a panel for a year. And tremendous demand after I came out. Why? Because she knew I was just going to bungle it. Because I had been so closeted, I didn't know the language. I mean, it's just because you're gay doesn't mean you
know everything.
Right either, you know? And I just think we need to help people just not be afraid.
And there's two sides to that equation. For folks, and I'll, identifying as a Black, male, heterosexual, cisgendered person, so I'll talk about that Black part of my identity. When you're seeking an ally, there's a measure of grace that's required, because if someone's saying, well, do I say African American or do I say Black, and do they say the wrong thing, and people who are seeking to be your ally that don't have the vocabulary, you have to have a measure of grace and give them a safe space to get it wrong. Absolutely. And not look for everything as a microaggression, but have a space where you're offering that grace to folks as they're on that learning journey as well. And that brings more allies in because they see.
No, I think that's a very important point. I mean, we're all struggling every now and then with the vocabulary, and trying not to hurt people's feelings, but also trying to say things. That's a learning process every day.
And it changes
Michelle,
too, right?
Oh, good.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
We work with a lot of marketers, CMOs, CCOs, and talk about bravery. It's interesting. When we get a creative brief now, we try to have a discussion about reflecting the society and what does that look like, right? And in Omnicom, we've worked with a lot of companies now to start thinking about the visual representation. But it's still a big thing when you say, oh, we have a gay couple, or we have, right? And we've worked with AT&T and Campbell's and Wells Fargo, some of the big companies early, to visually depict the LGBTI population. We just did within Ketchum, one of our firms, I don't know if you're familiar with Marco, but he's a designer, kind of does underwear, swimsuits, designs costumes for like Katy Perry and a lot of the celebrities. And we did the first all transgender models in Fashion Week this year. And he who affiliates with that group even got backlash. And it was very interesting. I had him on a panel recently, and he talked about how he thought he was so close to that community, and even he had to listen and learn. And then you see big companies like P&G. We've done the Thank You Moms campaign for years. This past Olympics, they did a Love Over Bias campaign using the first, gay Olympian that was outwardly, back to, there could be many more, and Gus Kensworthy, and talking about a mom and a son and all of that. So using your, companies to externally market, it is still bravery, and there's still, few examples, and I think there should be so many more examples of where we can really show people and change hearts and minds about what it is like to be part of this population.
Michelle.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
I think there's no one size fits all. I mean, because it depends on where you are, which is the culture, the language that you can use, the narrative, based on the same values and principles, but you can be smart. So I learned when I was the executive director of UN Women, and I went to talk to presidents. And if I started saying only about the human rights issue, they wouldn't listen to me. They say, okay, thank you. And I had couple of nice experiences. Nice. One African president, old one, he said to me, oh no, I really understand women's issues because, I have a grandmother, a mother, and a wife, and 3 daughters. So, and in Latin American, after I spoke and I spoke and I spoke, he said to me, don't worry, Michelle, I love women. So clearly they were not getting the point. I'm putting this example to say that I have asked myself, how could I convince people? I mean, how could I make them be leaders or champions? In that case of women's rights, and now we're talking about LGBTI community's right. So I think you need, so I discovered, and I'm trying to do that in my office right now, that it is about human rights, of course. It is the right thing to do, but you need to also explain to them why is the smart thing to do. So many of you speaks about the business case, and some people that will work, you know, in some others maybe something else. And of course, you have to sort of be smart, strategize better, because the world we're living on today is very difficult, and we have a pushback on human rights. So, but it can be done. I have tried to do it many times, and sometimes it works very well. Sometimes you don't get out there yet, but I think you need to work with other people and try to think. And you have told also, I think it's so important, media, advertising, to make it natural, because as we don't want things like Me Too to be naturalized, we do want that all human beings' rights are respected to be a natural thing.
Yeah.
So we can do it through media, just that we're talking about putting faces, not talking in abstract, because that won't, telling to the people it could be their sister, their neighbor, their colleague, their friends at school. I think to make it more human, to link it with humanity, I think also helps.
Yeah.
The other powerful thing we have found with allies is, you know, an ally, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, an ally who their own child is either gay or trans. We have one of our great leaders has a trans child and who's experienced incredible discrimination and bullying, and you know, he's just become the most outspoken, tremendous ally in the world, and very helpful all around the world.
And that story you tell, that is my story, Beth. Of, you know, you're not talking about me literally, but that's because there's millions of people like that they don't identify as LGBTQ, but they're a parent, and the empathy that you have of seeing your child suffering and the rights that you presume that they have, not having those rights, I mean, that's a deeper pain than is a deep pain. Let's just say it's a super deep pain, and that pulls you into the fight and brings you to the forefront.
Yeah.
So just to try to summarize, so it's about personalizing the message to the receiver, and the other thing is making it personal. So the word personal in two ways is critical here.
I mean, we look at our affinity groups, and it's kind of the 3 A's, right? Part of it is acceptance, then it's awareness, and advocacy. And when you think of those 3 things, you know, they each are very important in terms of making, you know, people feel not only safe, but that you're advocating for them. And I think that's what you're talking about. And how do you find ways to champion the differences and create that inclusive? And it does take a lot of listening. And I think, you know, even in looking at LGBTI, you know, understanding each of those letters and what that means to people in your organization is very different.
You know, as we go to this headquarters to the outpost, I think that's where, you know, the partnership's going to have to focus a lot. And what we have found in some of the most difficult countries is the business case is still awfully important, because you don't want to run head on into religion or culture. And so trying to stay focused on allies in the business case, you know, I think it is a useful thing as we focus on that.
Let's fast forward 5 years. Where do we want to be with this partnership in 5 years from now? And Michelle, I'm going to ask you first, because where would you like us to be? Because it's your role to stretch us.
Well, I would like you to have included much more companies. I'm not going to say a number, because to reach out much more companies. And I think you are key on this, because first of all, multinationals. I mean, if multinationals do that, other companies will say, well, yeah, I mean, this is a model we can follow. So I would like you to have many, many more companies on board, but not only signing, being part, implementing, and also identifying which are sort of the risk in this. What I mean, I mentioned bias, because, you know, one of the things that sometimes people have bias, secret bias, they're not aware of. So I remember that, you know, in my country, the first woman, I'm a medical doctor, the first woman who went to study medicine, at that time were only men possible to go, they put her, how you call that, sort of like this Chinese, you know, things to separate, I don't know.
Like a curtain or like a...
No, it's like a beautiful...
okay. Screen?
Like a screen.
Yes, right, okay.
And the reason, I mean, there's two I don't know if it's a real story. One said that for her, because in anatomy, so she wouldn't see the nude body of what they're studying on anatomy. Others say that it was for men not to get thinking another thing differently, so they would do that. So what I mean to say is that there's a lot of bias. And also I have the experience that on women's bias, but it's also on LGBTI, and I think we need to be very alert on that, is that invisible bias. That, for example, this experience, that was Deloitte, I guess. So when you interview people to make them, progress, for example, a man and a woman, and both were not very good interviews, but they had before very good performance. So on the women, they would say, oh, well, she had great performance before, the interview was regular, she's insecure. And when they analyze the men, they would say, oh, the performance was great before, the interview was regular, he has potential. So that is the kind, and you can have the same kind of bias with LGBTI people. So we need to work, that's why need to sensitize managers. It's not only what the biggest bosses think about it, how you ensure that the whole, and also at the supply chain, customer, etc., how you can. So I would like that many more companies be on board.
That's a good stretch. Many more companies plus real action.
Yes,
to summarize.
Yes.
Many more companies, but many more countries too.
Yes.
Because when you think about our multinational workplaces, we have mobility issues, and we can't. We just face it every day trying to move people around the world, and you can't move them because they don't want to go to a certain location, or we move them, but then their spouse can't come because of the visa restrictions. We've got this situation right now in Japan, and our number 2 person in Japan, we moved he and his husband there, and he's a Japanese national, got married in the U.S. when he was in the U.S. We moved him back to Japan. He's number 2 in Japan. Moved his husband. His husband can't stay because he can't get a visa because they're Japanese nationals. It's just kind of silly. Yeah. So we need countries' laws to change as well. There was a limit to how much we can do in this business, so we'll keep pushing.
Tony, I would just underscore Beth's point. I think one measure of the scale is how many corporations are involved, but I think ultimately it's the impact that we're having in civil society and the ability to change both cultural norms, which is ambitious to say that, but I don't think in a 5-year time horizon at that focal length it's too ambitious, and the ability to change the laws and regulations in nation states around the world. That is the ultimate ambition, and that's really where it starts to make a difference in making it truly safe to express your sexual orientation, gender identity in any country around the world.
I would hope in 5 years that it's not a handful of companies that are really showcasing LGBTI in their external marketing, and that we're not actually having to create preparedness plans for them about what they're going to say and how they're going to approach that criticism. And I think 5 years is probably a short time for that, but I hope we can continue to make a lot of progress. And I think too, as you're saying, there's the local part of this and the global part. And I think that we can't underestimate that our global communities in part are going to impact the local part, because if we can get those employees locally to know that they're supported by their companies, I think there's hopefully an ability for them in those markets to also, as you say, come out and have more of an influence on what's happening in their own countries.
Okay, so I'm going to try to summarize. So, more countries with more action, broader coverage, and both internally in the companies as well as into the external world, whether it's the policymakers, the customers, suppliers, etc. Then I hope you're making. I'm going to ask you to stand up, because you have been sort of at the start of all this, way back when you were at Microsoft, and you have been the driving force behind this partnership. So maybe just stand up, and we'll give Dan a round of applause.